Okay, we are recording. And yeah, let's rock and roll. So today is live coding OAuth, code along. So I've provided a starter repo for folks that you can use to do right along with me what I'm doing. We'll talk about each step along the way. We'll talk about OAuth and a little bit about how it works up front. And hopefully within 60 minutes or less, we'll have a working OAuth authentication flow. So let me pull up a diagram here. And actually, let me share my screen. So, and just tell me along the way if I need to change the text size, or if my video is in the way or something like that. That'll be helpful for me. Okay. So you should see my screen, and I've just turned off my video. Does everybody see my Atom window here?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. So rather than try to kind of craft some like really novel description of OAuth, I'm just going to go to Wikipedia and we'll start there. So here, I'll pull this up to the screen. OAuth is an open standard for access delegation commonly used as a way for internet users to grant websites or applications access to their information on other websites, but without giving them the passwords. This mechanism is used by Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, GitHub. What is the term that I was looking for? It's delegated authentication or something like that. The whole idea is with OAuth is that we are entrusting some other party to authenticate our users, to help us know that they are who they say they are. And in the process, we can also gain some information about them that they've provided to that particular service. So if it's Google, we can request their Google username, their Gmail address. We can request things about their profile. We can, if it's Facebook, you can request basically anything that's in the profile. And the user doesn't have to give that, but depending on your application, you can request that, or you can just request kind of the bare minimum. And OAuth is nice because logging into a website, not having to create a new username and password every time can be quite nice. And for us, when we're coding an app that's using OAuth, it can actually be relatively straightforward to do. And then we don't end up having to do things like storing their passwords and hashing their passwords, because the way that this delegated authentication works is that we never actually see their password. So let me see if I can find this diagram to show you the authentication flow. Okay. So all right, so just pulling up my notes. So any questions on OAuth so far? Crickets?
No.
Okay, good. So this is a diagram of how OAuth works, which I am borrowing from Learn Code Academy. And so an OAuth authentication flow starts from our site. There's somewhere on our site a button or a link or something that says log in with, And in this case, we're going to use GitHub. GitHub has a particularly simple, kind of easy OAuth way to register OAuth applications. And so we're going to use that. And so on our site, we're going to put a link that says login with GitHub. And usually you'll want to use actually like a logo or something so that you're associating your site with the kind of brand identity of GitHub, so that people are going to tend to trust clicking that link. So the user clicks that link and they are sent to a page that is hosted by GitHub. It is on their servers. It is their page. And it's a page where the user is prompted to log in. And that's only if they're not already logged in. If they're already logged in, they may skip that particular step. But again, this is on github.com, not on our website. Once they've logged in, they are prompted to approve the permissions that we're requesting. So we request, we'd like to see your email. We'd like to see, if it was Facebook, we could say, we'd like to see your email. We'd like to see your photos. We'd like to see your friends, or something like that. And so the user is prompted, hey, do you really want to give them access to this? And in the positive case, they say yes and accept. And then GitHub's server makes a post request back to our server to a callback URL that we've created. And that callback URL receives some data from GitHub, in this case, from the OAuth server, which is in this case, it's going to be some information about the user. We're gonna just get that. In other cases, there's actually another back and forth with I think it's access tokens. So you're given an access token, then use that access token to grab something on their server, to actually grab that information on their server. But it's possible to do it in this more simplified way. I've read that it is more slightly more secure, kind of an industry best practice to actually implement that additional back and forth. But we won't be doing that this time for simplicity. And so then once back on our website, we get this information from them, which may just be their username. And then we, in our database, create a new user. If this is a sign up, we create a new user using that username from GitHub. And then we proceed with an authentication flow like we would in any other case. Once we've created the user, we'll put them on the session, and then we can, on all of our routes, we can authorize that user or not authorize them based on the route. And we'll be using Passport for this. Passport is that kind of de facto authentication library. And we'll be using Passport with a particular strategy. So Passport, if I can pull this up here, Passport, JS. So Passport comes in kind of two pieces. There's the Passport library itself, and then there's also the strategies. And the strategies, we talked the other day about local strategy. That would be if on your local machine, you are going to be storing their username and password, or on your server, rather than using an OAuth type setup. So let's see if I can find that. Local Passport. Oh, no, I don't know if it's why it's in here. It isn't in here. But in this case, we're going to be using Passport GitHub. This will be the particular strategy that we're going to use. And we'll get into this in a minute when we actually look at the code. So we're going to be using Passport as the library for authentication, and it handles a couple things. In particular, it handles the data that comes in with that callback to that callback URL, and kind of takes care of some of the plumbing behind the scenes there. Does that make sense to folks, that flow? why we're doing this, why we're relying on this other server, what we're getting back from them. Are we good on that?
I think I just have to see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it may make sense as we go along, but don't hesitate to ask questions as we go. Cool. So let's take a look at the starter repo that I've given y'all, and make this as big as possible. So we'll start in the package JSON. So we've got a kind of basic set of dependencies. I'm using a library called Hogan.js here, which is just another templating library. It's not altogether different from the other templating libraries, but we won't actually be doing much of anything with templating. And I'm using this .env library. If you haven't checked this out, it's worth checking out. It's a way to configure your app using environment variables, and it's kind of the preferred way to do things because it's a good way to translate from working on your app in a development environment to then, if you deploy it to Heroku, you can keep the same configuration. So we'll be using that, and you'll see a little bit about that when we go there. So the server.js file, this is just kind of the bare bones Express server with body parser. We've got the view engine. We're using, here, let me make this a little bit bigger for folks. Is that big enough, legible enough?
It is for me.
Okay, good. So we've got Express session, which we're using here with our kind of standard defaults and our secret OAuth is cool. We've got a few basic auth routes, which I'll get to in a second. We have a success page, which this is the page we're going to direct to when we've successfully authenticated and everything is working. And that's how we will know that, that everything is working. And then I have this, just this basic page here at the root, which when you go to it, sends back what's in rec.session, what's in rec.user, and this rec.isAuthenticated, which is, this is part of Passport. Passport adds this function or this method to the rec when we've used it. So that won't actually render anything just yet. The auth routes are pretty basic. We've got a login route that renders our login page. The login page is just email and password if we were going to do local, the local strategy. And then we'll be adding a link here for GitHub. And then we also have a logout. So it just takes the session and destroys it. Yeah, and then I have this database here. And I put this together to try to make this as simple as possible. The main thing that you want to just pay attention to is the API for this database script here, which is we have a get user by ID, a get OAuth user, and a create OAuth user database function. I say it's kind of a faux database because I'm actually just using a JavaScript object to store the information so that we don't have to be creating and kind of loading databases as we do this. Pretty good? I'm going to ask periodically for some feedback because it's a little eerie when it's like totally silent on the line.
Yes, it's good.
Yeah.
This is when I was trying to figure out a way.
Good. Okay. So first steps, let's go to the terminal, and we're going to install a couple dependencies. So npm install, and we're going to do Passport and Passport GitHub. Second. So npm install Passport.
Don't you want to save those to your package so you don't have to do that manually?
Yeah, so in the newest versions of NPM, that's the default. So if you have an older version of NPM, it won't automatically save them. But if you watch here, doing this, hope I'm right about this. Da-da-da. You know what? Maybe I'm wrong about that.
It actually, yeah, that actually worked for me. I didn't know that though. I have Passport and Passport GitHub now.
Yeah, it worked for me too.
That's funny. I don't know why I didn't add it to mine. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna just quick remove my node modules here. That might be part of what's going on because it's giving me some problems here. So npm install passport and passport GitHub. There we go. Whew. Glad I wasn't wrong about that. That would have been so embarrassing. So now we've got these two dependencies. If you were working on your own project, not this OAuth code along starter, you would want to make a change to your database schema. So in your users table in your database, you might have something like ID, email, password, and of course the password would be hashed because we never put unhashed passwords into the database. Name, but you're going to want to add two other columns to that, which is OAuth provider and OAuth ID. OAuth provider is going to be something like GitHub. OAuth ID will be the GitHub username. So you'll want to update your schema. Then the next step is we're going to create a file called passport.js. And we're going to create this just here in the root because it's a kind of easy way to do this. Ultimately, if you had a kind of bigger app, you would want to put this in some auth folder or maybe some utils or something like that. But we're going to just plunk it down here for now. And we're going to do three things. We're going to require a database file. So const db equals require, and it's just db.js. You could just do db. And then we're going to require passport. Const passport equals require passport. And then we're going to require the GitHub strategy, which the way to do that is GitHub strategy equals require passport GitHub and then dot strategy. Okay. So we've got our requires, and now we're going to just rely on the GitHub passport GitHub docs for the next step. So I'm going to do this on my machine, which is go to the passport GitHub GitHub page. So this is, if you're following along, Jared Hansen / passport GitHub. And this has some code that you can just kind of copy and paste for how to set up and configure the strategy. And then we'll kind of modify it from there. So I'm going to copy and paste this configure strategy piece. Make that big enough for folks to see. And we're going to paste that in here. And let's see. So we are going to come back to this because what we see right now is we're going to need a GitHub client ID and a GitHub client secret. Those are two things that we'll need to get from GitHub. So the next step is to actually register our application with GitHub's OAuth system. So I'm going to go to github.com. And you can do this in your GitHub profile too. Anyone with a GitHub account can do the same thing. So I just went from up here to settings, and then down here to developer settings. And you see I have an OAuth code along test app because I wanted to make sure I didn't mess this up, so I tested it. So go ahead and click New OAuth App. And here you can give your application name, a name. I'm going to just use OAuth code along. Homepage URL in a kind of production setting would be the actual full URL to your homepage, but in this case we can just use localhost 3000. Don't need to put anything in the application description. And then the callback URL, this one is important. And what we want to put in here is HTTP :// localhost 3000, port 3000, and then auth GitHub callback. Just mute my do not disturb. So /auth /GitHub /callback. And then you can go ahead and register your application. And now we're brought to this page where you have a client ID and a client secret. And I'm showing you these here for the purposes of our code along, but you definitely don't want to share these with anyone. So as soon as we're done here, I'm going to reset this client secret so that nobody can use my account or use my app. But so what we want to do is actually put these in a .env file. And you'll notice in your root directory, you've got an env template, .env template. So go ahead and take this, and you can copy what's in here. And then you want to create a new file called .env. I've already got one, and it's already got, well, I'll actually replace what's in there. So I'll go to my .env, and I'm going to replace this. And I'm going to paste in my client ID, and I'm going to paste in my client secret. Everybody following along so far? So this is now, yeah.
Yes, we're following along.
Good. So this is now in a .env file. You can keep the .env template in there, but this .env file should be just .env, and it's actually git ignored. You never want to commit this file because this contains your secrets. So this is really just for your machine. And the way that this works, when your server.js file is run by nodemon, the very first thing that happens is this require.env. So we require that library, and then we run the config script, which basically just takes these keys and values and plunks them into process.env. whatever it is. So now we can go to our passport.js file, and we can replace this with process.env.github client ID and process.env.github client secret. And I think that's what I named it. Yep. So now we've got our client ID and our client secret being safely put into our app through environment variables. And the callback URL, we'll just set this to be localhost 3000. And let's see, this should be localhost 3000. Let me see. Yeah, that same URL. So localhost 3000 auth/github/callback. And this has got to be the same thing that you put into GitHub.
What I copied from that GitHub passport repository says passport use. It's a little bit different than what you have. Ours is passport use new local strategy.
Yours says new local strategy?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you sure that you're at github.com, Jared Hansen passport hyphen GitHub?
No, mine is just Passport.
Yeah, so definitely go to Passport GitHub, because it would say new local strategy if we were using that particular strategy. In this case, we're using the GitHub strategy.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good. So let's see. So we've registered our application, and for what it's worth, when you do this, you can also upload a logo, and that's a great idea, so that when you land on that GitHub page, it shows your logo, and it's kind of clear that that's who GitHub is sending this information to. Now, our next step is to write this verify function. So this is kind of one of the main parts. And let's see, if there's somebody that's not muted, if you could mute Mira, I think. Yeah, this is like kind of the main logic, or most of the main logic of the Passport configuration that we're doing, the OAuth configuration. And so we're going to do a few different things here. So we've got our database required. You can go ahead and get rid of what's in here, because we're going to be doing something just slightly different. So what we want to do is this function is going to be called, and we're going to have access to the access token and the refresh token. We won't be doing anything with them, but it's also going to give us the GitHub profile. So what we want to do first is see, is this user in the database already? And so the way to do that with this database that we've got is db, and then dot get OAuth user, just like that. And then the OAuth provider is going to be GitHub. And the second argument is the provider ID. And in that case, this is the profile.username. That's what we're going to use. And you can actually go to GitHub's OAuth site. You can just search for GitHub OAuth, and it'll have a list of all of the things that come in the profile. We just want to use GitHub, the profile.username. So like a database function, this is returns a promise. And so we can .then, and we'll get a user. So this is in the case that there is a user that's found. And so we can say, if the user is found, then let's return and call done with null as the first argument. So this is, so we should change this callback here to done. So it said CB in the stuff that we copy pasted, but we actually want to call that done. So we call it with done with null as the first argument, meaning there's no error, and user as the second argument. Oh, good, Stephanie's here. Go hide that. Good. So we're calling done, which is saying, we're all set. We've got this user. Carry on to the next step, which we'll write in a little bit. But in the case where there isn't a user already in the database, we want to create a new user. So we're going to do const new user equals, and then two properties, OAuth provider, and this is going to be GitHub, and then OAuth ID. And in this case, it's going to be the profile.username. So this is if they're not in the database. And then what we want to do is we want to create them in the database, insert them into the database. And so we're going to do return, and the function here is db.create OAuth user. We're going to pass it the new user. And you can flip over here to the database.js file to see what it does with that. It takes that user and kind of applies it to this new user object that we've got in here to make sure that all the field names line up. And then it puts it into the database, which in this case, again, is just an object. So we're pushing it into this users array. And then we're going to be console logging anytime that database changes so that we can just see what's going on. So we're going to take that and create that OAuth user, and then use that promise then take the created user is the name of that argument that we're going to give it, and we're going to call done with null and the created user. Does that make sense? Good so far? Any questions? No questions? All right. So, and then I'm going to add just here for good measure a catch. We're going to catch if there's an error, which hopefully there will not be, and we'll do console.log. And actually, we are sure that there will not be in this case because our database.js doesn't actually, it's not actually going to throw an error that we know of. And we can just console log, hey, there's been an OAuth error, an error somewhere in this OAuth flow, and here's the error. And then we also want to call done with that error. Okay. And so then that will close out that function, and that'll close out the new GitHub strategy, which is we give to passport.use. So we've given it a strategy to use. Now we need two other small functions, and the functions are passport, serialize, user. So this takes a user, and it's basically you're deciding what part of the user object that we have do we want to put on the session, and then we'll do a passport deserialize user to get that, to take whatever that is and then get the user back. So here we're going to take in user and done again. This is an arrow function, and we'll call done with null, no error, and user.id. So that's the only thing that we want to serialize in this case. And then we'll write passport.deserialize, let's see, deserialize user, and give that a callback function. It's going to take an ID, which is that ID that we just serialized, and a done function. And here, we want to make a database call to find the user by this ID, and then we want to return the whole user so that we can access that in our app. So we're going to do db.get user by ID and give it the ID. Then, because again, this is returning a promise, and we'll take the user that we get back and call done with null, meaning there's no error, and the user object. And then we can, just for kicks, we can do a catch and just give that the done function. And we could write an arrow function here, but it would just be redundant because catch takes a function and as its first argument gives it an error, and that's all that done needs if there is an error. So we're all set. So this is our main configuration for Passport. And at the end here, we're going to just do module.exports equals passport. So we're going to export passport. So, oh, and yeah, we pasted this in, but I already wrote that there, so we're going to get rid of that. And then I'm getting all sorts of linting errors. And so I'm going to run my prettier, and that's going to make some changes. It actually changed this from one type of function to an arrow function, but mostly just changed the formatting. So good. So we've got our passport configured, and now we want to go back to our server.js, and we're going to require passport from that file. And I'm actually going to say, I've seen this done both ways, where you require the passport that you've configured, or you actually just require the passport library. And it seems to me that both work, but I'm a little bit more familiar with this, where we're going to require the same passport that we exported from this file. So just saying I'm not 100% sure on that. Let's see, what is this complaining about? Oh, just assigned a value but never used. Too bad. So we're going to import passport, and then we just need to do two things down here. And you want to make sure to do this in the right place, which is we're going to initialize passport and tell it to put things on the session. And so that's app.use passport.initialize. Oh man, initialize. And then app.use passport.session. So put things on the session. So, and now let's, we have that success page, but let's, kind of up the stakes here, and let's actually add a authorization middleware so that we can only access this page when we've logged in. So let's do function, login, required, and it's going to take a request, response, and next. And we're going to say if, and then this is a feature of Passport again, if the request.is authenticated. So that's a function that Passport gives us, rec.is authenticated. So we're saying if the user is not authenticated, then return, and we're going to send res.status, and we're going to give it a 403, and we're going to render the 403 template that we have over here, which just says you are not authorized to view this page. And now, how do we use authorization middleware like this? Well, we can just plop it in here as the second argument to app.get. Login required. Did I spell that right? Required. And then give it a comma. Make sure I give it a comma. So that's saying for this route, we want to run this first before we run that route handler. And that's going to say, oh, we didn't finish this. So if the person isn't authenticated, then we're going to send them to the 403, but make sure to call next. So if they are authenticated, go to the next thing, which is this in this case, and we'll render the success page. The success page just says, hooray, you've logged in successfully. So we're getting close. The next thing that we want to do is add a couple routes. And these are routes that are going to handle our passport OAuth flow. So we're going to go into our auth.js file, and let's require passport here. Passport equals require, and take passport.js. So we're going to require our passport.js file. And then let's take our router here, and we're going to do router.get. And actually, let me think for a second. Yeah, so we're going to do router.get, and what to put in here. One moment. Yeah, so it's router.get, and the first path is our auth/GitHub. So this is where we're going to send the person if they want to log in using GitHub. And here, we can pass it as a route handler passport. We'll just give it, let's see. We'll just give it passport.authenticate. And we're going to use the GitHub strategy. And then we're going to pass it this the second argument, which is the scope. The scope is we just want this person's email. And again, you can look up on the GitHub docs all of the other things that you can request. In this case, all we want is just the person's email, so that's fine. So yeah, and so that closes out that route. So Passport is going to handle that entire route, which is basically going to redirect to the GitHub OAuth server. And then let's add one more, router.get and auth GitHub and callback. So this is when GitHub sends the person back to us. And here we're going to do passport.authenticate. And we're going to use the GitHub strategy. And then we're going to pass it two things, which is a success redirect. So where do we want to go if this person is successful in logging in? We want to go to success. And if not, we do the failure redirect. And we want to go, in that case, back to login. So good. Any questions so far?
It's redirecting. It's not.
What was that?
This is making sense.
Okay, good. Good, good. So we're pretty close to trying out this code, actually running it. So let's see, anything else here? Then the last thing is we actually just have to put in the link in our login page to log in with GitHub. And if we were being fancy, we would use the GitHub logo. But in this case, we're going to just do anchor tag href. And we're going to send the person to /auth/GitHub, which is what we just defined. And we're going to close this out and say login with GitHub. And so someone can click on that link, and it's going to take them through that flow. So if we've done all of that, we should be in pretty good shape. So I'm going to go to my terminal and clear this out. And let's try running the server. We got our update there. Let's try running the server. So npm start. And let's see, where have we got? Oh, cannot find module.env. Oh, we've got to add that one too. So let's do npm install.env. So that's going to take a second to install. And then we should be good to go. Okay, so let's try it again. Oh, not that. npm start. Cannot find module express, huh? What is going on there? Did I do an npm install in general? Let's make sure that's there. Oh, you know, I think I deleted the node modules directory and then didn't actually do the install. So .env might have already been in there, I think. So, all right, and that's finishing. All right. So clear this out. And I'm going to go to a, this is an incognito page because I've logged in recently with GitHub and I want to see this full flow. So let's go back and start our server, npm start. Server is listening on port 3000. And I'm going to try to keep this in the window, in the view, while we go to this page. Ta-da. Okay, so we're going to go to localhost 3000. And this is our just straight up localhost 3000 page where we are sending that information that we had, the session information and whether the user is authenticated. For some reason, that's not displaying quite as I wanted it. Let me just go back and, yeah, I'm not sure why that's, it's kind of all glommed together instead of looking a little bit nicer, but it won't. Why don't we do res.json and see if that makes a difference. No. Well, still readable, still usable, so we'll just do res.send. And so we've got localhost 3000. And now let's go to our login page. So we've got our login with GitHub link here. Make that bigger. And here's the moment of truth. Great. So it's taken us to GitHub. We know we're on https github.com, so we can trust that. And now we're going to put in username and email address. So my username, and I'm going to have to look up my password. A moment. I've copied my password. There we go. Great. So it's saying OAuth code along, the title of our app that we registered, wants to access your account. And here's all it wants: your personal, your email address, personal user data. And so it tells us where it's going to redirect to afterwards. It's going back to localhost 3000, which again, this will only work on your dev machine. You couldn't give this to someone else because they would not be running a localhost server. But we're going to click authorize. And huzzah! It sends us back to localhost 3000 success. And we can double check what happened by going back to this root route. And we see that the session, let's see, passport, yeah, so I'm gonna, right, so we've got session, user, and authenticated. And so session, it just has the cookie. User is my user ID. My email is null. My password is null because, again, we're not doing a local strategy. So we don't even need those, the email and password. What we do have is OAuth provider GitHub and OAuth ID Justin Hallheim, my GitHub user ID. And then authenticated is true. And again, that's rec.isAuthenticated. And then we can just double check. So here we get an update when the database has been updated, the faux database. And here we look in the database and we had a test user. Now we have this second user, which is what we were just seeing there. So that's it. We've now completed a GitHub OAuth flow from start to finish using Passport. And what questions do you have or comments?
I've run into some minor issues that I'm trying to solve. So
this is going to.
Yeah. It does seem like a much better idea. I mean, I will try to implement this.
This is going to get
the things that
the response information that comes
like
back when.
Okay. And you're running into issues? Are you running into them with the starter, the OAuth code along starter repo, or is it with your own?
And I could do some kind of if statement or something.
I'm trying to follow along
so I could say, okay, the status code is 400
I'm
something.
just debugging right now.
Then reject the promise.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
this sounds
remove
really cool.
the review.
I don't really have
Which
any
I could
questions. It seems pretty self-explanatory.
I don't have to,
Cool.
but I'm thinking way through it. I don't know.
And Mira, did you have any questions or comments before we wrap up?
Yeah, it also didn't run on my side. It's also showing all kind of errors. But so this library is for authentication, right?
Yes.
It's not for authorization.
Correct. Yep, it's concerned with authentication. And we can implement authorization, using something as simple as this middleware here, or you can get more complex from there. Mira, would you like to share your screen and we can look at what's going on with your code?
It's just today I started using that ESLint, and it's that ESLint is showing a lot of errors.
Lots of errors, sure.
Yeah, so maybe it's because of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to troubleshoot it with you offline. I hope this has been useful to you both.
Yes.
And have a good rest of your day.
Me too.
Okay. Bye.
Taxi.